Do you ever wake up, pour yourself a bowl of cereal, sit down and think, gee, I wonder what Brett's pfSense configuration looks like? Well, if you do, A, that's weird. B, today's your lucky day because that's what this video is going to be all about, my pfSense configuration. So no sexy intro, let's just dive right into it. And if you're watching this video, I assume you already know what pfSense is. And if you don't, it's essentially a FreeBSD based operating system that can run on pretty much any x86 based system and acts as a firewall / router. And it's awesome. It's free. You can throw it on pretty much anything and it's a solid setup. So let's dive into this and I will show you what I'm running. I'll be honest, I'm not running anything super crazy, but I did a poll on YouTube and you guys wanted to see what I'm running because you're a bunch of perverts. So let's dive into it. So here you can see the dashboard, nothing crazy. You'll see all of my interfaces over here. When you first load up pfSense, you'll have just a WAN and a LAN. You can see I have quite a few extras. Most of these are VLANs. I will get to that in a bit. Over here, you can see stats about my system. You'll see I'm running a Netgate 4100. You can run pretty much anything, like I said, any x86 based system. Currently not available on ARM systems, maybe one day. If you want to know more about my network layout in terms of hardware and configurations, I do have a video on that. I will link it up below. What? I will link it up here. You can check that out if you're interested. And as I go through this video, it's going to be more of a high level thing. If I do touch on something that I have a video on already that goes into more detail, again, I will link it up here and down in the description. All right, as I said, we are running a Netgate 4100. Everything is up to date. I am running build 22.05. You can see the specs here, nothing too crazy, blah, blah, blah. And over here, like I said, I have a bunch of interfaces. I'll get to that when I'm talking about VLANs and VPNs. Down here, you can see the OpenVPN configuration. You can see I have quite a few now. I do have a server set up as well as client instances. So this is what lets me communicate back into my home network by hosting a server, but then the clients allow me to use a VPN. The one I'm using is PIA. You may hate that. I know everyone has a strong opinion on certain VPNs, but I've had no issues with it. I'm perfectly fine with it. If you don't like that, deal with it. Down here, we have our HAProxy info. More on HAProxy in a bit, but it's one of my favorite features about pfSense. HAProxy is a reverse proxy that allows me to self-host a lot of services and expose them to the outside world. And when I try to access those services back home, HAProxy is what takes all the traffic and routes it to the right service. And gateways, more on that in a bit when I talk about routing. And then my services that I'm running. Again, nothing too crazy. Your basic DHCP stuff, HAProxy, a couple of VPN instances. I don't think I need 3, but there they are. And Unbound for DNS resolving. So yeah, that's the dashboard. Nothing crazy. Let's jump into the first thing I want to touch on, and that is going to be routing. Okay, so going into routing is where you will see essentially your WAN interfaces or your ISPs. And I only have a single ISP, but I have multiple gateways here. And that is because of my PIA client that I've set up. So when you set up a client VPN in pfSense, it's essentially going to act as a whole another WAN interface and give you another gateway. So if you have multiple WANs or multiple ISPs, this is where you'll want to go in and specify not only a default gateway that you want to use, but you'll also want to go in and set up a gateway group. So if we go over here, you'll see I have one set up. I don't really use it, but this is just for an example. So in here, you'll see that there is a tier 1 and a tier 2 gateway. The first one being my main ISP, and the second one being my PIA VPN gateway. You would never do this with a client VPN because if the main ISP is down, the VPN isn't going to work. So this is more if you have dual ISPs and 2 physical WAN connections coming in. Let's just assume this one is a actual secondary WAN just for the sake of showing off gateway groups. So The way it works is you specify a main one and a second one. You can put two in the same tier, meaning that they'll essentially split the load. But I want to have a primary and a backup. So we're going to do tier 1 and tier 2. And then the trigger level is going to tell you when you want to move to the next gateway interface. So there's different options. Member down means that it will only move to the next gateway if the one before it is actually completely down, no response. Then it goes down to more extreme, all the way down to packet loss or high latency, meaning that if my main one is experiencing really high latency or there's a certain amount of packet loss, it will move to the next one. And you can specify that here. I used member down when I used to run a dual ISP setup, but yeah, it's completely up to you. Then going back to routing, I don't think there's much else I want to cover here. If you go into your specific gateway, you can configure certain things like gateway monitoring and which ISP you want to monitor or which IP you want to monitor. I have it disabled because I only have one ISP or one WAN. So if it's down, it's down. I mean, it's just not going to work. So I don't need it to fail over to anything. So going into interfaces and interface assignments, this is where you will tie a specific interface to a physical port. And here you can see we have quite a few. My WAN is on IX3, my LAN is on IGC0. And then all the rest of these, mostly VLANs, as you can see over here, are also on IGC, which share a physical port with my LAN. And that is because essentially I have my main LAN and then I want a bunch of tagged packets to propagate throughout my network with specific VLANs. So I do also have a LAN 2 and a LAN 3 that get their own physical network port. And those essentially act as VLANs, but they're essentially given their own port. So I don't really need to tag it. And these are used as test networks. So with my Unify stuff that I'm testing, as well as my Omada network, I give them their own physical interface. And it really kind of acts as a VLAN. But it's really easy to set up VLANs. In pfSense, you go over here into VLANs, you can create one, you can edit them. You can see I have 4 of them here. If you want to add one, it's extremely easy. You specify which parent interface you want to use. So for example, if maybe I wanted this one on one of my other test networks, I could go to IGC1, I could give it the tag 99, and you will see it is created. I can go over here to interface assignments. Then from the dropdown, you will see my new VLAN that I just created. You can click on that, add, and just like that, we have our new VLAN created on the IGC1, which is also, which one is that? Let's see, that is my LAN 2. Really easy. I recommend using VLANs. If you don't know what they are, it's just basically a way of segregating your network into different pieces so that certain devices don't have access to other devices. So if we want to manage a specific interface, you can click over here on the interface itself, and then you'll have some configurations you can mess with here. One being the MTU, if you want to use like jumbo packets or something, most of you are just going to stick at 1500. This is where you will specify the IPv4 default address and the subnet. So if you want it to be a 10.0.0.1, if you want it to be a 192.168. whatever, this is where you would specify it. And then depending on how many addresses you want, how large you want your subnet to be, this is where you'll specify it. It'll probably be 24. If you want something larger, I would use 23. Let's dive into Firewall. And this is going to be one of the biggest features of pfSense, one of the main reasons why you get a fancier router / firewall operating system is for its firewall abilities. So let's jump in and look at what I'm running. And this may look very intimidating at first, but don't worry, it's not. All these grayed out ones are just test ones that I was using, so ignore that. Let's focus on the main ones. So this is on my WAN interface, meaning that these are the firewall rules that I'm allowing to open up to my WAN interface. So here you can see I have at the top, this is a NAT rule for my Minecraft server. So I'm opening ports 25.565 through 25.566, and that is just open for TCP and UDP. to my WAN so that I can host a Minecraft server. And that is set up through NAT rules. So let's take a brief detour and go into NATs under Firewall, and you will see a matching setup. So down here it is. Destination address is WAN. These are the ports. This is the IP I want to forward it to, which is the IP of my Minecraft server. And those are the ports I want to translate to. So you can see I have a couple. I have a few for Plex. I have one for, I think this was testing for something. I don't think I'm actually using this anymore. 1195, what is that? This might have been for mail server stuff that I was testing. Anyway, this is where you would set up port forwarding for your WAN under the NAT configuration. When you do that, it'll automatically create a rule for you in here. So cool. But how do I do firewall rules on my interfaces? Well, you just click on the interface. So let's look at LAN. Now this is going to be a little strange, and this is where a lot of people get stuck, because the way you will configure interfaces to talk to each other or not talk to each other, meaning that when you set up multiple VLANs, by default, your VLANs aren't going to be able to talk to anything. Like I said, when you set up an interface or a VLAN, by default, it has access to nothing. So you'll have to come in here and give it the accesses that you want. So let's skip over LAN for now. I'll come back to it because I think explaining the actual VLAN firewall rules will be easier first. So let's take a look at guest. You can see this is much more simple, much less spooky. So let's talk about what's going on here. So the first thing you'll see is an allow rule. Each rule will be either allow or a block, meaning that you can specify, I want to allow these specific things or I want to block these specific things. So first thing you'll see is an allow rule for everything coming from the guest network on any port going to this specific destination, which is on another VLAN. And I believe this is my Kubernetes load balancer. So I'm giving my guest network direct access to my Kubernetes load balancer for routing traffic. And I believe that's specifically for Pi-hole. So you can see that's an allow rule, and that's the only thing it's allowed to touch. Next step, we have a block rule. And what this is doing is saying anything coming from the guest network and is trying to access my external network, block it. And same for guest to IoT. The next one and the last one is guest network going to anything that's not my private networks, allow it, and tell it to go through WAN 4. Okay, let's break this down. So we're going to dive into it and I will explain what is going on here. So this is a pass rule, meaning that it is allowing traffic through. It is allowing traffic that is coming from the guest interface on IPv4 using any protocol. So you can see that's specified here. Our destination is private networks. What is private networks? That is an alias. What is an alias? Well, if we go under firewall, you will see aliases. And this is a really cool feature. Going in here, you can give an alias to a list of a bunch of networks, a bunch of specific IP addresses, whatever, and you can use that in rules so that you don't have to manually type out, dozens or 100 IP addresses or networks. So here you can see I have a Cloudflare one, which is a list of all of Cloudflare's server IPs and networks. And then I have a private network. So this is both of my LANs, LAN 1 and LAN 2. These are the full networks. So I call them private networks. So if we go back, you'll see I'm saying allow everything from the guest network to go through if it's not private network, meaning that if it's trying to access the outside world, the internet, let it go through because it is not one of my private networks. And that is where this invert match comes in. If I had this set here, all this would be doing is saying allow guests to talk to my private networks. Now I'm saying allow it to talk to everything as long as it's not private networks. And going down here, you'll see I've manually specified a gateway. This is one of my gripes with pfSense. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong here, but I've talked to other people who also have this issue in that if you have multiple gateways set up, in my instance, like we talked about before, I have my main WAN and then I have the PIA client VPN that also acts as a gateway. If I set the default gateway as my main one, which I have before, you guys saw that that was my main default gateway. and I just say use default, it for some reason doesn't default to what I've specified as my default gateway in my routing configurations. I have no idea why. I've tested it with multiple ISPs, multiple VPN client setups, and this is why I'm manually specifying the gateway, which is the gateway group that I've created before. I honestly don't need to specify that. It would be the same as just doing this. So yeah, now I'm saying just use my default gateway. So I've had to specify it in 2 places, which is quite annoying. Okay, so if we go back into LAN, you'll see I have quite a few rules. A lot of them are grayed out for testing purposes and whatnot, but here you'll see a lot of sources like we saw before with using aliases. One of the big ones is PIA devices. So let's dive into this one here, and it's very similar to the rule we just talked about. So it's a pass rule on interface LAN, and it's saying if the source is one of these PIA devices, and this is an alias I use to specify devices in my network that I only want to go through the PIA client VPN interface. So these are devices that are in my network that are maybe doing some type of Captain Jack Sparrow stuff, and I don't want that to be tracked. So yeah, those will only go through PIA and not through my default AT&T WAN. And the way we do that is we say, yep, if it's a PIA device and it's going to anything, let's go down and only go through this gateway. So specifically, PIA devices will be routed through the PIA gateway. So yeah, I think that's enough on firewall rules. I'm finding out very quickly that I could probably make an entire video on firewall rules. This video is already probably going to be pretty long, so let's move on. If you have any questions, let me know down in the comments. But I'm going to try to cover as much as I can without spending too much time on stuff. One last thing I want to touch on under firewall is the traffic shaper. So you can go in here and specify, whatever interface. So maybe your guest VLAN, you only want a specific bandwidth allowed for that interface. You can specify that here. The reason I'm not doing it here is because I'm actually doing it in my Unify configuration. So I'm doing it all within Unify, but you can do it in pfSense. This is where you do it. It's really easy to set up, and limit your guests to, 10 kilobits per second, and then they'll want to go home. Perfect. Okay, moving on to services. There are a crap ton of services. There's so much stuff you can do in pfSense. I'll talk about the few that I'm using. Main one you're going to use, if you're using pfSense, it's probably going to be your DHCP server. So let's dive into that and take a look at some of the things we have here. So once you go into here, you'll have DHCP servers for essentially every interface you've set up. So here you can see, all my VLANs, all my physical interfaces up here. And here is where you can go down and tell it, what the range that you want the DHCP server to hand out on. It's where you can see all of your static DHCP leases that you've set up. You can see I have quite a few. And you can also specify custom DNS servers per interface. So if you want your main LAN to use a specific DNS server, but you want, maybe your guest network to use a different one, maybe you have different Pi-hole instances for different VLANs, you can come in here and specify that there. And if we look at the range I've set up, you'll see I'm running from 0.100 to 1.245, meaning that I have quite a large range of DHCP addresses to hand out, but I've also given myself about 100 to hand out statically. So, you can adjust this. That's just what I have set up, and it works well for me. Let's compare that to the guest network. Pretty similar. Here you can see it's a 192 network. It just makes it easy for me to see, when a client shows its IP address, it's pretty easy to specify that between one on my main network versus one on a VLAN. That's why I use 192 on all my VLANs. And then the tag number here, again, you don't have to do it that way. That's how I do it. And I'm running from 10 to 250, meaning that I have from essentially 2 to 9 for static ones, and then from 255 or 250 to 255. And you can see I have a custom DNS server here, which is my Pi-hole instance. So guest network, you get the Pi-hole DNS. And a whole bunch of nerdy stuff down here, not gonna cover that. let's talk about DNS resolver. So pfSense can act as a DNS resolver, giving you local DNS and resolving custom DNS records that you've set up. So here you can see I have quite a few. I'm using the local domain raidowllab.com, and I've specified a number of different devices that I want to use. So for example, my main Epic server, the host would be Epic, the domain would be raidowllab.com, and it points to 10.0.0.73, so that when I type epic.raidowllab.com, it goes to my Proxmox server so that I don't have to use IP addresses. Neat. It's very similar. If you don't want to do resolving, you can do DNS forwarding mode down here, DNS forwarder, but I use DNS resolver in forwarding mode. When I was using it not in forwarding mode, in resolving mode, I was having issues between that and Pi-hole. So it's in forwarding mode, meaning that it's not going to try to resolve itself. It's going to forward DNS requests to the main DNS server that you have set up. Okay, moving on, HAProxy. This is a big one. I'm gonna try to rip through this one pretty quickly so the video is not longer than the Titanic. This is deserving of an entire video. So I do have a video on this setup specifically in self-hosting. Again, linked up there if you want a more detailed explanation. But what this is doing is allowing me to self-host things and route the traffic coming in to those specific instances or specific services. So within HAProxy, you'll essentially have a front end and a back end. So a back end is going to be all your services that you're hosting. You can see I have my QNAP stuff, Overseer, PhotoPrism, File Browser, Nginx Proxy Manager for testing, LittleLink, Heimdall, a lot of things that I'm hosting on the back end. The front end is going to be where it's taking those requests and saying, okay, what are you requesting to access? Parsing that and then pointing it to the correct back end. So if we go into my main one, let's take a look at what's going on here. You can see it's listening on port 443, so standard HTTPS requests coming in. I've set it up through Cloudflare. So those requests come in, and what it's going to do is use ACLs to essentially parse and say, you know, if they're looking for dashboard.hostyboy.com, which is the domain I'm using, then forward that to a specific backend, which is specified here. If I attempt to go to dashboard.hostyboy.com, its name is Heimdall, and what that means is that it's going to use the Heimdall ACL and then point to the backend Heimdall. And I know I just glossed over a lot of things here, but again, in that video, I go into more detail about how to specifically set these up. But this is a really cool feature of pfSense. It's one of the main things that keeps me tied to pfSense is the ability to host a reverse proxy directly within your firewall/router operating system. It's super convenient. It handles all of the certificate and encryption for you. It's fantastic. One of my favorite features. And some of the services here, you guys can read, UPnP stuff. I don't use that. Wake on LAN, Captive Portal. If you want to set that up, look real professional for your grandparents when they come over and try to log into your guest network. Okay, VPNs. There's quite a few to pick from. I use OpenVPN. If you don't like that, okay. And in here, you can easily set up servers and clients. So you can see I have a server set up. I initially talked about that where no matter where I am in the world, I can remote back into my entire home network using my OpenVPN server setup. So it's really easy. You can add one. I'll go over the one I have here. Go in, specify device mode, what protocol you want to use, the port. A lot of this is default. It'll generate a TLS key. You can specify the authentication you want to use, the server certificate. This is essentially going to be a self-signed certificate that OpenVPN will use. You can specify the encryption algorithm. There's a lot of stuff in here, but honestly, a lot of the default stuff will work for you. You'll want to go in here and specify your IPv4 network. So I just made one that looks like a VPN or a VLAN, but one that's currently not in use. So 192.168.70. And that's going to be the IP network that it's going to use to allocate incoming connections to. And then it's going to ask what local network do you want this to essentially be hosted from or be exposed. And I used my main LAN network. So one thing you'll notice as I'm scrolling through here, there's a lot of configuration in pfSense. pfSense is not the sexiest operating system around. It's not the sexiest GUI, but there's a lot in here. I strongly suggest if you're using pfSense to at least test it out first. Get in here, mess around with it. You'll probably break some things, but that's okay. That's how you learn. If you're doing it on a test network, it's much less stressful because when you break something on your main network, everything goes down and your wife gets mad at you. So use a test network. Over here in clients, you'll see I've set up 2 different clients using my PIA account. So let's take a look at this one. For example, you'll go in, get a description, PIA, a lot of the same configurations as the server. This is where you'll kind of enter the information that PIA gives you. PIA is pretty good about giving you the information that you need to make this connection. Specify the server you want to use, the port that it's on, PIA username and password. And a lot of the configurations that they give you, you enter here. And once you do that, it's honestly that easy. It'll create a client and then spit up an interface. And you'll essentially be able to use that as its own kind of WAN. Really cool, really awesome feature. Okay, statuses. This is going to be a lot of information stuff, so you'll see a lot of the same things that you saw over here on services, but if you want to get more information on how they're running, you can go over here and it'll spit out some information for you. But yeah, it's pretty self-explanatory. There's nothing really too useful over here. The one is DHCP. So if we hop in here, you'll essentially see all the leases that are out there. And we can sort these and you'll see the static ones, you'll see the dynamic ones. And if we want to turn one from a dynamic into a static, we can go over here and click this little white plus and then give it whatever, whatever new static IP that we want and click save. And it'll now be a static IP address. It's really that easy. Okay, diagnostics. There's a lot in here. The main ones I mess with are ping when I have issues where I can't access certain websites or I think a network is down. You can specify a host name to ping. You can specify the source address. So if you want to do that on a LAN address for a local device, or you want to do this to the outside world using a specific interface, you can do that here. Ping it, it'll let you know if it's working or not. States, you can go in here, it'll give you your states table if you're interested in nerdy stuff like that. That's all listed here. Trace route, a lot of the stuff you're used to seeing. Reboot, you're gonna reboot a lot if you're testing out things. Packet capture, really useful to have. Backup and restore, that's something you're going to want to do. A cool feature with pfSense is that you can back up your entire configuration in the event that you break something. So if you're messing around on your production system and you're making a big change, I strongly suggest you go up in here and download your configuration before making that change. So in the event that you make a change and break something, which I've done multiple times, you'll have a backup file to just essentially reload pfSense to where it was before. And I've broken pfSense so bad to where it wouldn't even boot and I had to physically attach my laptop to the Netgate device and access the console. So maybe I'll do a video on that one day because I've done it quite a few times, so I'm a little bit more comfortable with it now. And then if you end up needing to restore something, you would just go down here to restore. You'll choose that backup file that you created and then it'll just do its thing. Bada bing, bada boom, you're back to where you were before. So one other thing that I think I skipped over is dynamic DNS. Over here in services, this is extremely useful. If you have DNS providers that are routing traffic back to your home network and you have a dynamic IP from your ISP like I do, sometimes that changes and you'll want to make sure your DNS provider knows what your new IP address is. So within pfSense, it can handle all that for you. You can go in here into dynamic DNS. You can create a new one. You saw I had quite a few there. And then it has so many different service types here. The one I use is primarily Cloudflare. Depending on which one you select, you'll enter information about your accounts. and it will automatically update that information so that if your IP address, okay, that was right. If your IP address changes from your ISP, that'll get propagated down to your DNS provider. So one I use is Cloudflare. Another one is NoIP for my Minecraft servers. You can set this up so that all your friends, all your cool friends playing Minecraft on your server won't get mad if your IP address changes. But yeah, I think that is all the stuff I wanted to cover. I know I didn't cover so many things in pfSense, but those are the main things that I have set up within my setup. And like I said, there's a lot more here. And if I covered something that you want more information on, don't hesitate to ask questions down in the comments, join the Discord, ask me over there. I'm more than happy to share the knowledge that I've accrued with pfSense with you guys. But yeah, that is it. Let me know down in the comments if you're using pfSense or if you're thinking about switching to it. What are the concerns you have? What do you like about your current pfSense setup? Let me know. I'm interested to see what you guys are running. But yeah, that is it. If you liked this video, then drop a like below. If you like content like this, then please consider subscribing. It helps the channel a ton. If you want to join the Discord, link is down in the description. Come hang out with us, bunch of nerds. We're real cool, don't worry. We don't bite, unless you want us to. I want to give a huge shout out to my Patreons and my YouTube members. You guys are absolutely amazing. You guys are my dynamic DNS service that is constantly updating. You guys are awesome. That is it. If you're still around watching to the bitter end, you're awesome too. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.